We call now the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, the Aviation Maintenance Repair and Overhaul Business Association, Sport Aircraft Association of Australia and the Gliding Federation of Australia.
Anthony White is my name. I'm Morris Tony. I'm the President of the Sport Aircraft Association of Australia and one of the founding members of the AGA, which is the Australian General Aviation Alliance.
Okay.
And,
Mr. Morgan?
Benjamin Morgan from the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of Australia, and we're also a member of the Australian General Aviation Alliance.
Okay. Mr. Talbot?
Richard Talbot. I'm here representing the Aircraft Maintenance Repair and Overhaul Business Association. We have approximately 350 aircraft repair and overhaul businesses across Australia, and I'm also the Vice President of AOPA Australia.
Okay. All right.
I'm Peter Sasko. I'm the President of the Gliding Federation of Australia. Just so everybody understands, I'm also a member of the SAAA, who are at the other end, and I'm a member of RAOS.
Our pilots within the CASA regulated arena are being subjected to medical certification requirements that are incredibly high and are forcing pilots out of our industry. And what do I mean by they're incredibly high? We have a situation where a pilot, in order to pass a Class 2 medical, can be required to undertake a plethora of additional blood work tests, sleep apnea tests, sleep deprivation tests. You name the test, they seem to be exposed to it. And these tests cost our members and cost our community enormously. I have examples of members spending upwards of $5,000 and $6,000 to gain a private pilot medical certification. If you have a look at what the United States has done over the past 2 years, and we look at what the United Kingdom have done over the past 2 years, they have successfully reformed their private pilot medical standards. Both countries recognised there was a need for wholesale change, a total liberalisation of the system and move towards private driver's licence standards. We in Australia had hoped that this is exactly what CASA would do. Both the UK and the US aviation regulatory system is a unified single system, meaning that there are no self-administrations, there are no privatised subsections of its roles, duties and responsibilities. They produce a framework. That regulatory safety framework is used by all participants and everybody understands the rules that they are to adhere to. The difference principally here in Australia is that over the past 25, 30 years, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority has promoted the ideal of creating sectors that effectively are becoming privatised monopolies in themselves. If you are a pilot in Australia today and you would like to fly a glider, a light sport recreational aircraft, a warbird, a certified general aviation aircraft and a gyrocopter, you have to be a paid-up financial member of 5 different organisations effectively. And that's a bizarre situation. I don't believe anywhere else in the world this is being replicated. And both the US and the UK recognise that the higher standards of medical certification were a barrier to entry. And the costs involved in processing through those medicals were becoming higher and higher. We have a bizarre situation in Australia where CASA are promoting the differentiation of private and recreational. Can anyone explain this? What's the difference between a private pilot and a recreational pilot? Unfortunately, Senators, this is a section of the community that's really feeling it now. I've got so many station owners that will phone up and say, Ben, I've got to sell that GA aeroplane because I just can't pass the medical anymore. And as my colleagues from the AMR-OBA will attest, this is impacting our maintenance engineering fraternity. We are watching the capability and sustainability of our general aviation maintenance community decline and decline rapidly.
We are seeing a decline in the use of general aviation aircraft.
I know, Mr Morgan, you might have said this flippantly, but I would have thought the airspace in the United States and in the UK is in fact different to Australia in terms of congestion and in terms of much harsher weather conditions. I've never had to sit on a runway in Australia and have de-icing occurring. So,
Senator, you're absolutely correct.
So
you've nailed that one. They do face far more challenging weather conditions than we do here in Australia, which just further amplifies the disparity in the system that we have. Because it's a sad indictment of the failure of CASA to actually reform our system. At no time did the Civil Aviation Safety Authority engage with our organisations or any of the representative bodies at this table about its intentions or plans around its final decision with respect to medical reform. You know, you've got CASA asking Qantas what its opinions are on private pilot medical reform. CASA's asking Virgin, the Australian Airports Association, asking the Recreational Aviation Australia for its opinion, but not actually seeking the opinion of the very people that they're there proposing to change the regulations about. We have all seen the impacts of airport privatisation on our industry. Airport privatisation has virtually destroyed our general aviation business economy through rapid, uncontrolled price increases and rises. I've been thinking about this particular issue for the last week leading up to this hearing today, and that is we are supposed to be living in a democracy. It's an awfully disappointing realisation that when you take on a role such as what I have with AOPA, you kind of come into it thinking it's going to be okay. We're going to write to our minister, we're going to have meetings with our minister, we're going to discuss the needs and aspirations of our community, and we're going to get things changed so that we can take advantage of opportunity. But when you sit with a minister and the minister shows absolutely no interest and no real commitment to actually change anything, the reality starts to sink in. And so I do despair, Senator. I despair not just for AOPA, I despair for the thousands of pilots and the hard-working men and women of every aviation business in this country that their voice truly is unheard. Until there is something that truly exposes the fact that we have a regulator that is not genuinely consulting, not collaboratively working towards the future, I really don't know what the outcome will be. But now what we've got is a CASA system which is becoming incredibly expensive.
What's it called? Oz thing, whatever. Oz Flyer.
Yep.
So it's encouraged. We'll go to the US, get trained, come back, and then we'll work our way around the system so we don't have to do the training here in Australia.
So, Senator, just very quickly, my response to that is for nearly 30 years, the Australian aviation industry has been calling on the Civil Aviation Safety Authority to adopt the US regulatory framework. It's almost like a broken record. For years, decades, 30 years, think about this, 30 years there has been a consistent message, adopt the US regulatory framework. Yet for 30 years we continue to be told by our regulator, you can't do that. They've put up every obstacle, every reason, every excuse known to mankind as to why they can't do it. And now we're in a situation where Australia is wholly uncompetitive on the global stage.
Yeah.
And given the fact that the US currency advantage to the Australian, you would think we would have a thriving flight training industry right now and a thriving private pilot economy, but we do not. I think what's very important to understand about the flight training costs in the United States is one of the biggest fundamental differences, well actually two huge fundamental differences, but one of the largest contributing there is the fact that 75% roughly of all flight training in the United States is conducted by independent flight instructors. Now we've taken this proposal to CASA and this proposal fell on deaf ears. We had a representative from the United States who is one of our directors, Mr Mike Smith, who's a former Deputy Director of Aviation Safety for CASA. I think he knows something about the job and he knows something about our industry, who runs a flight training and maintenance organisation in the United States. And Mike Smith made it abundantly clear to the representatives that in the United States an individual can start a flight training organisation and they can also start a maintenance organisation and they can also start a charter organisation with the bare minimum of documentation and a bare minimum of cost. And what we're talking about, Senators, is spending maybe $5,000 to get a multiple set of approval set up. Yet in Australia, I am yet to meet an operator who has been able to achieve the successful start-up of a flight training, maintenance or charter operation without spending bucket loads of cash. And these new approval regimes which were introduced by CASA have added enormous costs to the operation of those schools. And as a consequence of that, you've actually got a number of schools that have decided just to pack up and exit. What's actually happening in Australia is a significant number of our schools are being sold to Chinese interests. There was a fairly large school at Bankstown Airport which in fact belonged to the president of AOPA, Aminta Hennessy. She's just sold out her flight training operation and it's gone to a consortium that are now, I think there's 5 Chinese airlines involved in that consortium and their training. The growth we're seeing now in flight training is all to do with Chinese market training. It is not to do with Australian local training. There is a real problem in our general aviation industry, a massive problem. And that problem is the way in which our safety regulator is regulating our business community and our users. And the system we've got is the donkey, and the system they've got in the United States is the Ferrari. And I know which one I would prefer to be driving.